Hello, one and all. We are here today to talk football, or more specifically, why I fell out of love with football. I used to be a really big football fan back in the 80s and early to mid 90s. That was kind of my period. And I live in Southampton, England, and I supported the local team. And of course, even at the time when I was into football, there were a lot of frustrating things, annoying things. The way the advertising was starting to grow and get bigger. Even as the Premiership became involved, and it was always like the sponsored things and sponsored cups and the sponsored shirts. If you go back to football, sort of like the 70s and backwards, people just had plain football shirts. They weren't sponsored and this sort of thing. The constant need to keep changing the shirt designs and all of this, and the corporate nastiness involved in it all. It's just become so much of a business, and I could see it happening at the time. And there were things I didn't agree with at the time. It was fairly expensive even back then, actually, for tickets and things as well. But yeah, I mean, the idea of following football, there's a human element to us, the sort of tribal element that feels that we can vicariously live out the successes and unfortunately failures of a team. So that's why we latch on to and follow sports teams. It makes us feel part of a group, and it's just human nature. But there are other elements that come with that tribal group. Well, now I think back to it, when you get local derbies, two local teams taking each other on, and they're normally like big enemies and all this sort of thing. You'll find that obviously with the game, and Southampton's got a particular one. It's Portsmouth, but things do get really quite nasty between them as well, and I've never really understood that. All this thing batted back and forth, and it just feels nonsense and tribal, and I didn't even understand it back then. And I remember, as a good example of how nasty these local derbies sort of situation are, I remember unexpectedly being driven to Portsmouth. Now, I was wearing a Saints t-shirt. I was just a kid, yeah. I was wearing the Saints kit t-shirt, and or the Saints, the kit top, and I ended up in Portsmouth unexpectedly. So I realised, we're in Portsmouth. You expect me to get out the car? I'm wearing this. This is a Saints shirt. I can't go around wearing this. I didn't really have a choice. Now, what I could do, we decided, was take it off and wear the t-shirt underneath. So I pulled it up and took a look at what I was wearing underneath, and underneath was a Young Saints t-shirt, that you only get as being a member, a paid-for member into the Young Saints group, the Young Southampton Football Club group. So that was even worse than the actual Saints kit t-shirt. So I just like pulled it back down again, and I thought, what am I going to do? I was forced to get out of the car and walk around and do things. And, I'm a child. I'm, like 15 or whatever, 14, 15 sort of age, yeah? And abuse is being hurled at me. And I was only a little meek 14-odd-year-old, I was small for my age. I didn't look very grown up and that, yeah? You could easily call me younger. And just the abuse that was being shouted at me, the hate, from wearing that shirt, just going about, and obviously a lot of you would say, well, it's obvious that's going to happen to you, but it's intrinsically wrong, isn't it? And I knew that straight away that there was something wrong with the idea of the tribal nature of the game as well. But keeping my nose out of that and the stupid idiots' excesses and drinking and opportunistic fights and trouble on the streets, and the huge demands on resources, police having to try and step in and keep control of it, when our people should just know better. The police have better things to do anyway. then that isn't even the reason that I gave up the game as a supporter. I used to play the game as well. I had to give that up because of back problems. So, I mean, that didn't help. But I think the thing that really drove me away from football, aside from all that, was the growing feeling of my team's identity meaning less. Now, what I mean by that is we had local people anyway, and some of them would be what you'd call trophy hunters, so they'd glory hunters and that sort of thing. So local people who should be supporting the local team, that's kind of what you do, kinda, and they instead support a really different big team for whatever reason. At the time, Manchester United was one of the big ones, Liverpool was one of the big ones. You'd hardly ever, back in those days, you'd hardly ever find people who were Chelsea fans, right? And then all of a sudden now you see a lot of Chelsea fans around because Chelsea became really big in the later years. So, and obviously they don't live in London. These might be people that have hardly ever been to London, and yet they're Chelsea fans, sort of thing. You know, it's a strange phenomenon, isn't it? The way they pick a team, like in that respect. So it's got to actually have some sort of meaning, because the lineup of the team could change in identity so much so, and they might have bad spells, good spells, and when they're having that bad spell, if you just latched onto them while they were good, what's going to keep you interested then? Well, anyway, Saints, Southampton were a local team, so I supported them, and my dad supported them, and it was something bonding to be able to bring us together anyway. And even when I got out of it, he stayed in it, but it was one less thing we could do together. But what bothered me was when it started to become apparent that the transfer market was so wide open, that so very many foreign national players were coming in and being signed into all of the clubs in England. And I saw the first stirrings of trouble from that. There was always some foreign players and such, but it has got to the point where you could pretty much find now a team of 11 and not one of them's an Englishman potentially. That could easily actually happen, and that's a bit of a concern, I think. And there was talk of the ramifications of what it would have on the England national side, that it wouldn't promote good footballers on home soil and this sort of thing enough. And well, England have been doing exceptionally bad in football since then, historically. Okay, so maybe something in it, I don't know. But that was the first thing, because it was an identity loss to my club. There wasn't the chances of having anybody homegrown actually playing for their own team. It does happen now on occasion, but they even come up through the youth scheme and very often just end up transferred somewhere pretty early on if they're good. I mean, you'd always have that problem, wouldn't you, with the smaller teams? They'd have to let good players go, and it's become such a business. And do you remember when Blackburn won the Premiership? Pretty early on into the Premiership actually being formed, yeah? And they actually bought that title because they signed specifically all the right players to get the job done, as well as like Alan Shearer randomly and people like that, and then they suddenly just win the title, and they win the title that once, and then that was it. They let it all go, and people are walking around as Blackburn fans and all this. What is it, like a random team suddenly out of nowhere, and they've just built their way into success. And I didn't like that. I didn't like the way that a team was based on who it was funded by, more than the locality of the players, the stock, this sort of thing. It just feels pointless. Why support a team at all? So It's just kind of random in a way. So yeah, it took a lot of the fun out of the game for me, really. And I don't know, football obviously became really about business, and obviously they were getting paid so much. And people even say it now, well, footballers get paid so much, but they don't give up the game, do they? They don't like step away like I did. They still sort of like, they moan about it, but they keep with it. Well, it was enough, all these things combined, for me to actually, you know, turn away from it. And I think that's why you know, the magic was gone for me. That's why the World Cup still holds an interest to me, because you can't buy a title there. It is just based on the quality of each national side. Yeah, you can't like transfer players in for stupid amounts of millions or something to play for your side. You know, you can't. There's no easy route. You know, it's about who is legitimately the best, rather than what is effectively just business cheating for trophies. And that's just how I feel, really. So yeah, national play is the only thing that I watch these days. And it's quite sad, really. But you know, I've got plenty of other things to do anyway. But I just thought, you know, I'd share those recollections of the past with you, and see if any of you have had something similar. Does that strike true with some of you out there? I'll see you at the next one.